But I'm just delighted to be here for this session because this idea of talent and learning has always been a challenge and has become even more of a challenge in recent years. First answer I get when I ask any leader, IT or non-IT right now in companies, what's the biggest challenge you're facing? And they all say talent. Right? And they talk about the Great Resignation and all those other things, but this has been a challenge for a while, and it's going to continue to be. And we have 3 really smart people to help us try to solve this challenge and make it work in their companies. So if I could just introduce you each, and then what I'd like you to do is, certainly hiring is a challenge, but there's something behind that challenge that is really driving it in a lot of companies. So if I could ask you each as we go down, introduce yourself and just give one aspect on what's behind this skills challenge, what's behind this hiring challenge that might be something we could fix. So Melissa, why don't you start?
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Melissa Swift. I lead the transformation practice for the US and Canada for Mercer. Probably a lot of you in this room know Mercer, but not for this stuff. We really work on the work that my group and I do focuses on how workforces are changing and then how HR organizations then need to adapt as a consequence. So a lot of fascinating client conversations right now. I think the one area I would focus on is this idea of kind of how do we open up the job spec so more people could potentially do any given job. I think that's an interesting kind of Great Resignation challenge is, how much of the Great Resignation is basically self-inflicted, that we've, kind of smushed jobs down so small that it looks like not a lot of people can do them, but it may or may not be the case. So that's an interesting challenge, certainly, that I'm seeing out in the world there.
It's interesting. I was just reading an article somewhere, and it started by saying people don't need degrees, but companies require degrees.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what you're getting at, right?
60% of jobs in the United States require a college degree. Now, I guarantee you 60% of jobs in the United States shouldn't.
So great. Next, Suman, why don't you take it from here?
Hi everyone. Suman Thareja. I'm a partner with McKinsey in our digital practice. And I also lead our technology talent practice, which basically means I spend majority of my time with CXO, put your favorite letter in for X, whether it's D or I or CHROs, in thinking about a broad range of talent topics, whether it's workforce planning, hiring, retention, performance management, and really just a broad spectrum. The one that I think is quite interesting is most of my conversations start with clients on, listen, Suman, I'm having a really hard, challenging time with recruiting and hiring people. And as I unpack that, it usually it's a part of the problem, but it's not actually maybe even the crux of the problem. And I find workforce planning as one that tends to be one that starts to emerge as we unpack that. Because a lot of the executives I work with, they don't necessarily know the extent of the gap they have between the skills they have today, the skills they need in the future, and how wide is that gap in the middle? And how do they plan to actually close that gap? So one that I like to explore a lot with my clients and tends to be underneath the layers of, I'm struggling with hiring.
Great, thanks. And then Wafaa?
Great. Well, my name is Wafaa Mamilli. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer at Zoetis. And Zoetis is a worldwide global leader in animal health. So we make drugs, vaccines, medical devices, diagnostic devices. So if you have a pet, eat milk, drink milk, eat eggs or meat, you know us without knowing us. Is the joke I always like to say. I would say, I would echo what we heard so far, but I would elevate it even from my seat, as I live in the challenge of talent, not only in my function, but enterprise-wide. But I think the social contract we have with the employees is broken, and it goes both ways. I really like the kind of the expectations of the jobs and how we employ them and who do we bring. And we talk a lot about hiring instead of thinking about workforce planning and think about talent management. We tend to forget about the people we have that we still need to develop and retain. And I know I like personally, instead of starting saying hiring, then developing and retaining, I like to start thinking about developing, retaining, then hiring. Of course, it's always a life cycle, but I think we have to completely rethink the workforce planning. We have to be more strategic at it, and we have to look at the full life cycle and challenge our assumptions, challenge the assumptions of degrees, challenge the assumptions of location of work. I moved to Florida. My company is headquartered in New Jersey. Am I doing a poor job? I don't think so. Am I going to do a poor job? In fact, the opposite. I'm going to be even more engaged and committed to what I'm going to do because I have that type of flexibility. So we have a lot of things to rethink and challenge the way we've done things for the last decades.
Okay, so let's pick up this question then, right? So you've talked about, maybe we need to rethink what the right candidate looks like. We need to think a little bit more about internal development and think about our talent strategy in general rather than just hiring that one person. So, I've heard over and over again when I talk to leaders in companies, they say it's actually easier to hire externally than to hire internally. Why is that? And what can we do to fix that? Anybody?
Yeah, I can start.
Sure.
I mean, I would say that this notion of kind of a simple skills inventory, many companies really struggle with it because number one, you've got to kind of define the skills, right? And that's a lot harder than it sounds. Number two, you've got to figure out which ones are actually relevant because you may be hiring and in fact paying a lot for skills that you don't need or don't use. Mm-hmm. And then number three, you've got to figure out which humans those skills are located in. And then number four, what is their actual level of proficiency? And so it's interesting. I'm working on a book right now, and one of the things I talk about in the book is the idea of misunderstood work, where your boss doesn't understand the work you're doing. It's really common in organizations right now. But if you think about it, if your boss doesn't understand the work you're doing, they probably don't understand the skills you're using to do it. And in the technology function, this gets really pronounced really fast. So all of those gaps along the chain, I think, are what lead organizations to then, it's easier to go out and say, okay, we want this in the market, and people will come back to you with resumes. You don't have the equivalent information or insight for your own people.
I would add it's because it's a consequence of the fact that we have done a poor job at developing people. It's a journey. You don't wake up one day and say, oh, today I need cybersecurity or analytics or whatever. I need to go and develop the existing workforce that I have in the technology function or elsewhere. If you have done a poor job, and most of us have done a poor job at spending enough time developing talent inside and outside our organizations, then it's a struggle. So better late than never is my belief. We need to focus on having the skills inventory. We need to focus on challenging that skills inventory and understanding the level of acumen we need. And we need to build plans, and we need to build a learning culture as well, that there is a mindset of continuous learning, and none of us is working with anything we got in any college degree or anything in our life, regardless of our age or our maturity. So how do we make sure that we embed that continuous learning attitude and mindset and support and bring that inside the population and our colleagues, and think about continuous learning and just make it part of the way we do business. And don't make it just part. I would add here that companies mostly do a very good job at developing top talents. We do an okay job of taking care of those who are underperforming. It's the full middle that tends to be more than 95%, 90% of the population in any organization that we neglected in the past. And we're now paying the price, and that's why we're struggling.
Well, let me turn that around then. So you're saying you have to do that, and I totally agree with you, right? And we're actually working on an article on how to help the rest of the organization develop, because I think you're right. When I ask HR leaders, how are you doing this? They say, well, our leadership development programs are fantastic, but what about the rest, right? So how do you do this well for the middle of the population?
I think most organizations don't do it well,
Okay.
to be honest. I think organizations spend a lot of time understanding the skills of a person when they're about to hire them. That's when they go through the interview process. They'll understand what they can do. Do they have the skills I need for them to have to do the job that I'm hiring them for? Once they're in, unfortunately, they get a little bit forgotten until it's time for them to become a people leader. At that point, they get plugged into maybe the leadership journey or building their soft skills. I think we were talking earlier in a panel about storytelling and communication and relationship management and building a followership. Unfortunately, between the time they join and by the time they get to become a people leader, they get forgotten a little bit. And some organizations maybe are doing it well, but I think as I look across the board, we're not seeing a pattern and trend where people are investing in that early tenure or early career folks to get to that level where they can then plug into the people the people leadership stuff.
Well, now you're making me really depressed. So somebody has to have an answer here.
No, can I comment on one thing, George? You said you asked HR leaders. I think that's the first maybe thing we need to change.
Okay.
We shouldn't ask the HR leaders. We should ask all of us. I don't ask, we have an HR team supporting us. I ask my team, my leadership team. It's part of their performance review. It's part of how I assess their performance. It's part of my monthly review with my CEO. I sit on a monthly review. I define my dashboard. There is a section about people in my dashboard that I talk to her every single month. She loves that. We engage. She gets me the coaching, the feedback. We work on it. But that's part of our job as business leaders of our own functions. HR supports us with the tools, the programs they have, but how do we make sure we have the right, and there are leadership skills in our functions. You need leadership skills, communication and business acumen and so on, storytelling and many more, influence without authority, all those things. And you need technical skills. How many of you sat in functions in technical teams who stopped learning about technology? I did. So how do we make sure that we keep pushing that acumen, but how do we declare to the organization what do we value? What are the 5 most or 3 most, whatever they are, technical areas we want everyone to develop acumen on, and they can pick and choose in their lives. So I am passionate about this area. Maybe it's the reason I'm here, but it's our job. It can't be an HR function job, and I think in the past we thought about it as part of leadership developments, and I like them to give us the tools, but we have to own it and track it, and it needs to be part of our collective, our own performance management, or it's not going to work.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in with a quick statistic on that, is that part of the issue with HR is HR does not spend its time on the right things. So we mined a whole bunch of data where we looked at for different organizations what HR actually does with its days, right? And HR spends about 3 times as much time on talent acquisition as it spends on all of talent management. So not just learning, but all of talent management. And if you think about that imbalance, right, that's what my co-panelists are describing, all of this time on hiring and so little time on even the broader bucket that development sits in. And that's something where I think the business has to keep up the pressure and say, spend time on what matters to us, which is the development side of the equation.
So, the easy answer, of course, is that it's every manager's job to develop their people. And we know that's an absolutely horrible answer because the managers don't do it, right? And so we see that some people are doing it. You're picking this up. Is there a way to get other people to take on this attitude to really make it work better? Is it that this part of your scorecard needs to be how you're developing your people, or is it more than that?
I'll steal a quote from Wafaa from the last panel. Leaders have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, right? Mm-hmm. And I think when it comes to learning and development, if you see a senior leader investing in himself or herself to upskill themselves on a certain topic or going out and learning, guess what? The direct reports are going to pick that up and they're going to do the same thing. And it'll flow all the way down. So I think it comes back to a bit of the learning culture and ingraining we use buzzwords like how do you create this learning culture or culture of continuous development, but it really comes down to role modeling. And if the leaders start to role model and care about it, and they ask about it in every one-on-one, and they talk about it in performance reviews, and it becomes something that managers get measured on or the individual gets measured on, then it becomes systematic. Then it becomes part of the DNA versus this initiative or a project we need to run so that we can have this development journey so people can be on it. It just needs to become part of how you are in your DNA.
And make it really part of the incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's not something that's just written there. When leaders, we're human beings. If we have a conversation with a leader or if someone is having a conversation with me and I'm going to be penalized at the end of the year, in my bonus or my payout or whatever it is in my compensation, on the fact that am I developing my team? And it's not just the top talent, it's all of them. It's top talents, readiness of succession, preparing the successor of the successors, and deep into the organization. If no one is having this conversation with me, it will be the last thing I'm going to take care of, and it would be the first thing that I'm going to drop when I don't have time. So for me, it's with my leaders, with people working in my organization, people who have the duty. I think I talk in my organization as God gives us this duty of supervising people. It's a responsibility we have. Those are the biggest decisions we make. The rest is just business. If we don't do that, if that's not part of the incentives process, I will not do it in the same way. So in my organization, it's part of that conversation. And those who don't will be coached, supervised, and helped. but at the end of the day, their incentives do align to that as well.
So it's interesting, there are no easy answers in business, but I think you just gave us an easy answer, which is that you may not be able to change the whole company, but at least you're part of the company. You can put those incentives in place to start with, and maybe some things will happen. Thanks. It's nice to get an easy answer sometimes. Yeah. Hey, let's think about another question now. So as far as bringing people in, it is hard, and have you found some interesting ways that you or your clients are finding to bring in new talent, especially the fresh new talent, the young people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say non-traditional talent populations. So the most famous example, right, is Amazon taking people out of high school and saying we can teach people with a high school degree how to code. Mm-hmm. But also things like, formerly incarcerated people. For 2 decades, Johns Hopkins has been hiring formerly incarcerated people across an array of roles. 0 incidents and much higher retention, right? And that's a group that, at least in the United States, high unemployment in that group, and unfortunately, there's a lot of them. Some other populations you might think about, neurodiverse folks. Certainly the IT community has had great luck targeting that population. Underemployed foreign-born workers, right? Something like 26% of foreign-born workers in the United States are operating, below their level of training, right? And some of the things might be, okay, we just need to teach folks English skills or something like that. So thinking about kind of some of those populations you haven't accessed to date. And then and a lot of times it's a really simple piece of training. It's not hard to teach somebody English. It's not hard to teach somebody some of the basics of coding, right? Where it's not a sophisticated layer of training that stands in between you and a really big talent population. I think that's one of the most interesting strategies that I've seen.
I might share a slightly different perspective on that and focused on not less the talent pools, but more about the how you go about getting people into the organization. And really bringing design thinking into the process, right? We live in an experience-based world. Everything is an experience. How you get your taxi, to how you order your Starbucks, to how you order anything on Amazon. And so why does hiring people, or why does having to go through finding a job have to feel like a root canal, where it's complicated, it's painful, I don't know where I'm in the process, you forgot about me, it's 90 days later, I don't know if I'm still in the queue. And flipping that on its head and using design thinking as a way to say, how can I reimagine? How can I reimagine the process of recruiting and hiring in a candidate-centric way that's delightful, that lets them interview me as much as I'm interviewing them, that's not 90 days long, that is something that is a first glimpse into what it's like to work for my organization. An example comes to mind. I was working with a public sector company, and their hiring processes were 90 days long. They decided to leverage design thinking and do the Post-its and the walls and the stickies and all of that. But out came the outcome where they took their 90-day process and brought it down under 10 business days from first touch to offer. And so I ask you to think about your own processes. How long does it take you to go from that first touch to offer today, and what's holding you back? How can you reimagine it so you create an experience that when you do tap into all the sources that Melissa talked about, those people are actually excited to come work for you, and you don't lose them in this muddled process that takes too long. So just something to think about from how do you make this delightful? How do you make it fun? How do you make it engaging so people want to come work for you?
That's fascinating. If I had to guess, not only is it faster for the people being hired, but it's probably actually a better experience for the people doing the hiring.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and involving hiring managers in the process, right? Often people that are coming in are not necessarily meeting the team they're going to work for. Why not? Why isn't the team that's going to absorb this person onto their team doing the interviewing? Going back to, if you make it part of incentives, they are so highly incentivized to pick the right person to bring onto their own team because it's their own team and not just somewhere else for the organization.
Brilliant. I can't wait to try that, to do that process. Can't wait, yeah. Yeah, I would say the other piece, it's not much the hiring, but it's we look as well on the other side that what's the experience we offer to the candidates when they're hired as they onboard. So how to think, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the onboarding process. How do we make, especially in an era of COVID, how do we make sure they have what companies call buddies or coaches, peer coaches or things like that? How do we make sure they find the right information, they understand the processes? Because it's about not only making them the most productive, the fastest, it's about retaining them. In most companies, and I'm sure you'd have data from the Mercer database on retention. Retention of those who we just hired tends to be more of a challenge than those who were with us for the last 15, 10, 20 years. So that's an area as well where we spent a lot of time thinking about what's that process, what's that experience, and how do we make sure that we onboard them the fastest for them and the fastest for the company.
So it's kind of like dating then, right? When they come on board, you want to have this wonderful time where you just absolutely adore each other, because then when the bad time happens, you can look back on that, right? But if you never had that, then that's interesting. Wow. So if you don't feel loved when you come in, then you're much less loyal to where you're going.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. How about apprenticeships? Are you having any luck with apprenticeships? Suman, you had something you wanted to share on that, didn't you?
Yeah, and George, when you say apprenticeship, I assume you mean kind of the intern, the graduate, kind of that population, or are you talking about?
It could be, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think there's two pieces to it. I think the one thing I feel like we've lost in the last couple of years, and I'm seeing this across a lot of organizations, is the apprenticeship that happens when someone who knows about something teaches someone new about that topic or that trade or institutional knowledge and helps them actually grow their craft, right? Goes beyond the learning journeys, but to apprenticeship that then turns into followership, that then turns into loyalty. And I think that is significantly missing in the last couple of years. How you bring that back, I think we could talk about lots of ways of doing that, but I think that's one element of apprenticeship that's hurting over the last couple of years. The other piece of apprenticeship, and I think the thought here is more around growing your own talent and being in it for the long run to grow and scale your talent for the long run. I'm seeing a lot of organizations take a larger pool of interns and graduates over the last few years so that they can bring this talent in, usually bigger, 2 or 3x bigger than they typically would, so that they can actually mold them from day one. They can engage them into the organizational culture from day one. And they're in it for the long haul. They're in it for the long haul to build their capabilities for the next 5 to 7 years. So I think about apprenticeship, I think in those two facets, is the intern program changing and becoming something much bigger than that, but then also the on-the-job training, the on-the-job coaching that people get for more experienced team members that we need to find a way to bring back as well.
Okay. And these don't have to be the formal apprenticeship programs, and these can be informal, but just that idea that you're helping to grow.
Yeah, and I think the modalities of apprenticeship have to change. I mean, if you think about the ways that work is changing, right? Work is becoming more asynchronous. Work is becoming more deconstructed. Work is becoming more transparent. If you think about traditional apprenticeship, right? It's, I'm the boss, I have all the knowledge, you don't have the knowledge, right? We're working at the same time synchronously, and we have these nice non-deconstructed jobs. So if you think about those three trends, right? It's now we're working in a shared document, right? Asynchronously. Transparency, I, the junior person, have far more access to information. I don't need to hear it from my boss, right? And if work is deconstructed, I'm not necessarily apprenticing job to job. I might be apprenticing task to task. Mm-hmm. So you've got those three trends kind of changing work. And so then what apprenticeship even looks like looks really different. And I think it's really interesting to look at organizations that have had kind of those trends in their workforce for a long time and in their ways of working and say, okay, well, what does apprenticeship look like in their context? Because I think part of what we have to do is not kind of go back to the old model, but actually change what apprenticing kind of can look like, which is exciting, but I think very daunting.
But as I hear you talk, I keep hearing both of you saying apprenticeship is really just developing your people. They're one and the same. So it's not really a new concept then, is it? It's just we haven't been doing it? Is that the idea? Or am I putting words in your mouth?
I don't think it's a new concept. I think it's taken on a new meaning over the last 2 years, especially. And it's taken on a new meaning in the context of Melissa described in terms of the relationships and engagement with that new talent has changed. It's no longer I'm the boss so I can tell you what to do. Often the bosses don't actually know or aren't actually skilled at the craft that they hired this individual for. And so the nature of apprenticeship is changing. And finding ways to make it work in the organization is what we're suggesting folks, think about how to make that happen.
That can get at another challenge, and we're still talking about relatively new people, but another challenge is, people grow by stretch assignments. And if you're talking about an internal labor market, especially where it's easier to hire externally, you can hire somebody who already has the skills rather than invest in helping somebody grow those skills. So do you see companies doing a good job of that next step? So not I'm 20 years old, but maybe I'm 30 or 40 years old, helping me take that job I'm not ready for yet. Certainly in consulting, it happens all the time. But what about real companies?
Yeah, I think it's something we do, especially in the field of getting people into data science. Because we launched our Digital Fluency, which is a program aimed at improving the digital fluency across the enterprise. And we launched 4 modules. One of them is data science analytics. And I was very nicely surprised of how many people took those classes and completed the modules. And I was even more nicely surprised about where they were coming from. They were not coming from a technology function. They were not coming from a research function, which they tend to be tending towards data science or the data type of opportunities. They came from throughout the enterprise. And so there is that I have now a belief that there is that readiness and thirst in part of the organization to be upskilled in areas that they don't have now. So how do we take that talent and offer them the platform? And we did it in a way that it's not a push. So we're monitoring at the population level just to see what's happening, but it's not mandatory, it's nothing. We're allowing people to go and take whatever, subscribe to those and finish or not the modules. And it's been amazing to see the energy. I mean, our Yammer channel for that is exploding and people want to do more. And now they're getting into sub-communities. Now there is a data science forum that's not just the data scientists. By the way, software engineers as well are stepping in and others are wanting to learn software engineering. So it's an amazing thirst in the full population of the enterprise that's just taking on. So there is that opportunity of elevating the skills. Maybe finally upskilling is going to be happening with and reaching. Maybe if they want to change jobs, why not? We've allowed, in fact, we had 3, 4, maybe 5 now rotational assignments between different teams coming to a data science team from outside the data science. So we'll see where this is going to lead, but these are amazing opportunities.
So do you think you can use, instead of just, hey, we need to give you all digital literacy, you're actually using this as a prospecting tools to find people that might want to come into your unit?
Absolutely, and our succession plan pipeline, in fact, improved by adding, in fact, now I have names on our critical roles succession for my organization, people from outside of the technology and digital function. And I believe personally in rotational assignments. My career grew by moving from one place to the other. And I think the more we do that, the more enterprise leadership we develop, the more understanding of the context and then the more technical acumen we're going to have throughout the company. So yes.
So you highlighted something else you said just made me think about a different topic, which is that we're digitally transforming everything in organizations except, it seems, the learning and development processes. And in many cases, those tend to be stuck back in the way I had them when I started working in the 80s. But you said something interesting there that said, we had our formal courses we're delivering, but then they start peer learning and they start their group community. So can you say a little bit more about how you kind of started this, but now they're learning among themselves?
Yeah, I think it was about the intentionality of the process. So we wanted it to evolve that way, and we had discussions from the top down. So this is an executive team level discussion where we said we're going to make it a pull versus a push. So they decide. We're going to design it in microbytes. So we're not going to have these modules that last even 10 minutes is a lot sometimes. Microbytes. We're going to group them in logical grouping so that they make sense. And we're only going to do 4 themes. We are not going to go and inundate them and overwhelm them. And we chose agility and data science and security and cloud or something like that. So 4 mostly. 2 of these 4 exploded. And then after that, because we're watching, so it's a pull, not a push, but we're watching, we're taking a data-driven approach. Then we start to see high energy, and we're watching the dialogue in Yammer, and someone once said, well, we want to create this community. Then we facilitated that for them. So we give them tools, resources to help them, and then they get together, and then they want to start sharing what they're doing. Oh, we need this library of XYZ. Yeah, we go, and in fact, they're building the roadmap for us on how to take this journey. It's been for me the most beautiful thing to watch, because we knew what the vision was, we knew what the dream is still, but we didn't know what's going to pick up. And honestly, people who were before me in the company were very, very nervous about the change I was driving. They were So we made it a pull, not a pull versus a push. Sorry, I mix always these two verbs. A pull versus a push. We were careful, make sure we don't overwhelm them. But they picked up way more than I was expecting. I think in the first 4 weeks, we had something like 94% of some teams had started something. 32 finished in a matter of 3 weeks, finished the module together. So the lesson from that is you have structure, have the platform, design it in a modern way. That was kind of the microbytes. Be intentional about what you're doing, and be agile in listening to what's going on. And we responded. We have a person dedicated to that. That's all she does, phenomenal leadership. But pulling resources from the full company, and then people volunteer, and they're doing that on their work, and they love doing that. So it's been, what, a year and a half now that we've launched this thing, and it's going big.
You know, it's interesting, we wrote an article a couple of years ago. Actually, I know when it was, because it was the month before we all went home for COVID. And this article was called The Transformer Chief Learning Officer. And it said we need to change the way we learn because we're in a different environment. We need to engage people better. We need to make it more agile. And it sounds like those lessons, you know. And so what I hear, when I think about great teachers, even in elementary school, figure out what your students are engaged in and keep giving them more material so they can grow on their own. Why don't we do that in companies? You're doing that. And you're allowing them to self-organize and do more, and just give them the support so they can learn as much as they're willing to learn.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting model.
But I think it requires leaders to do something that's a little bit countercultural, which is be unselfish, right?
Yes.
So if I own these amazing people and they go train themselves to work for Wafaa as part of the organization, right? I'm giving up, in some ways, my best, most agile people, and that's what's required. So I kind of give you, the leaders in your organization, a lot of credit for having that unselfishness. It's also the unselfishness to say, I'm going to allow people to spend time on this. You know, we've had meaningful intensification of work over the last, let's say, 30 years. We constantly want people to do more and more and more and more. And that's why I think some of your strategies around, you know, a pull rather than a push worked well, because it wasn't, I'm going to jam another element into your working day. It was like, if you have an affinity for this, come seek us out. And I think that's the, I was quoting to somebody, a great quote from Oscar the Grouch about you'd be a grouch too if you lived in a trash can. Contemporary organizations can be a bit of an overstuffed trash can, right? So if you can make some of those moves, right, in learning to take a few things out and create that space to, you know, rattle around a bit, I think that's a bit of what you're describing.
Do you find certain types of jobs or certain types of people are more apt to do this kind of self-engaged learning? Or is it anybody?
I mean, I would say those that like to learn, those that know how to, they learned how to learn, I suppose, rather than learn the topic itself. And it's hard to then figure out, you know, which category do people fall in. But I think it really comes down to those that are just curious and interested and and learned how to just learn and figure things out tend to be more, my guess is more excited about the types of things that Wafaa is putting out in our organization than those that feel like, you know, I've got this skill and this is my skill. I'm going to take this to my grave and I'm going to do this, you know, whether it's this organization or another organization, and this is my career. And so I think people that think about themselves as learners and those that enjoy the learning process in doing something different and creative and innovative are the ones that probably thrive in it more so than those that are, you know, I learned one thing and I'm good and I'm going to hang out here for a while.
Yeah, our intent is to drive as well a learning culture. So that's something that we are intentional in this program about driving that as a mindset in the organization. What we have seen is you kind of have people in waves. You are going to see people who are learners, and they're going to jump on that. We kind of almost know them. We know most of them in the organization, and they never disappoint us. They just go and they run. And then you have some of them who are going to be big influencers. So we made sure in our program, and it started just happening by accident, then we jumped on it and made it by design. We learned from it. We started to make sure that we brag or we have others brag for others, and created this kind of almost natural competition that happens between leaders and executives. of where the organizations are going in that learning mindset and taking on the things and making an impact and talking about things in town halls or showing scorecards, whatever they wanted to do in their organizations. And then you start to have, after this wave of learners, leaders in the learning mindset, you start to have the followers, and that's where the biggest uptake took. And you can almost put people in these three categories, and I'm sure there's a third in these two categories, and there are the laggards. Whatever you do, they're not gonna catch on, and that's okay if that number stays low and gets to a low, below double digits or something like that. I'm personally okay with that. But that's how things have panned out, at least in our, I still call it experiment, even if we're in full pilot mode, but we've seen the data evolve in this way. The role the leaders play and the change agents play, we know them, the influencers in the organizations, the ones who people follow, they're not always the leaders. The role those people play, and storytelling, again, we do lots of storytelling around this theme, is helping a lot. And you do see that. We do a storytelling, we communicate it, and then you see an uptick. Something happens again. The people who didn't connect for 3-4 weeks to the platform reconnect again and start taking a little bit more modules from the platform.
You're reminding me about a CLO I met, and I've been spending the last 5 minutes trying to remember her name, and I can't. I can picture her face, but not her name. And she took on, about 2 years ago, she took on the job as global CLO in a big company. And she said she was going to spend a year of learning. So every day she posted to the entire company, here's what I learned today. And it could have been, something about the company. It could have been something about legal. It could have been something about how to cook food, right? It didn't matter. It was something she learned every day. And she was trying to set up that idea that learn in little bits, but get in the habit of doing it. Yeah. So that leader behavior you're talking about there.
It's behavior, absolutely, yeah.
So there's a question from the group here. We know that digital talent is expensive and it's hard to find. And we know there's a lot of turnover there. And we know also often in some jobs you just have to learn more. Like, the technology world, you just have to learn faster. Some people would say that. I guess I would say that until you're telling me I'm wrong, right? Do you need to have kind of a dual track, that how you handle the technical people versus how you handle the rest of the people? Or can you do this all with one HR organization?
Yeah, so it's interesting because our view at Mercer is that you need to design HR around how you want groups to interact with HR, which is generally not how HR organizations are set up today. So if you truly make that determination that this group has different interaction needs, like they're going to actually interface differently, then it's a worthwhile move. If you're just saying it's a different set of needs, but they're going to fundamentally interact with HR the same, then it doesn't make sense to really set up HR differently to do so.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Screams from the audience.
So any other thoughts then? I mean, do we need to treat our technology people differently, or is it?
I don't.
Go ahead.
I don't see how you don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think if your goal is some version of digital excellence, then the skills you need in the organization differ and they're unique. You need data scientists, you need designers, you need good engineers, you need, you name it. You need these digital skills. And if you bring them all in and you treat them exactly the same as people managers or folks in the business until business and IT becomes one, we've talked about that a little bit, but if you treat them the same as any other people manager, what you're incentivizing them to do is to lose their craft as they get more and more senior in the organization. And so for them to not do that and for you to have the digital excellence that you want in the organization, you've got to create a dual path. And there's lots of ways to do it, but you've got to create a path that is real, not just on paper, but in real life. It's not one of those that looks good on paper, but no one's actually walking the path and there's no one senior enough in that path, or the titles are the same, but the compensation is different, or the sphere of influence looks different. You truly dual paths that have parity is important to start to create. I mean, the digital natives figured this out a long time ago. This is not a new concept. Now it's much more about other organizations that have a strong digital presence, or they're looking to be stronger in their digital side of the house. They have to create these paths if you want to retain the people, because they will look at other organizations where they get to grow in their craft, they get to keep it, and they're going to go there. So to me, it's non-negotiable. It's table stakes.
So back to what Melissa was saying. Oh, sorry, you're going to say it anyway.
No, I was going to say that I do think it's a bit of a double helix, though, where
Okay.
you're pathing separately, but you're coming back together. Because the issue is, if the dual track truly runs through things like a lot of HR decisions, then you end up with what a lot of organizations have right now, which is, oops, IT broke our comp structure. Oops, IT broke our job architecture. Oops, IT broke this, IT broke that. And it's not that IT broke those things. It's that they didn't have a reconciled, business-driven view of how it all fit together. And for me, that's the double helix, right? You need those special environments for talent. You need those different career paths. But you don't break your overall career pathing framework to do it. And that's the helix coming together. And I think that's part of why it's tricky, right? Sometimes it's easier to say, okay, here's where we're going to separate, but then you need those connection points where the organization really has a reconciled point of view, because that's what allows things like the talent mobility that Wafaa is talking about, right?
Yeah, here's how we're doing it right now, and I think it's going to echo what we heard so far. The framework is the same, the content has to be different.
Yeah.
And has to converge sometimes. Of course, if we have a storytelling module, which we're still building, I'm a big believer in that, everyone can take about the same, and the content in that storytelling can be different, but the content has to be different. I think the dilemma that the non-digital natives have, which I have too, we have too at Zoetis, and we're fixing that, we're working with HR because we don't want to break anything. We want the competencies framework to be the same. We want even the levels to be the same, kind of consistent. But what we don't have today, what most of us don't have, we don't have paths for the technical talent to grow. In simple terms, you can grow in a managerial path. You can become senior director, manage teams, and vice presidents, and so on. We don't have yet, some companies have done that. We don't have yet that technical path to grow inside organizations. We're in the process of creating that. You can be a software engineer, and I know I was looking at working with some other of my peers, how they call those the principal. Then it gets to a level of VP in software engineering or data science, but how do we do that without breaking the HR framework? Because they don't want me to have 7 types of jobs, and they stopped me from doing that, and I'm glad they did. I wanted to do software engineering path, and I wanted to do data science and cyber, and then before they know it, I'm overwhelming them with something they can't manage, so they argued with me, and they were so right. So we're not doing it that way, we're doing it in a different way, but that's the challenge we face for many years, for the last decades, is we were not walking or talking the walk. We were saying we want technical seniority and things like that, but those people had nowhere to grow, and that's something we absolutely got to fix.
So Suman, in many ways, I see consulting firms as being the talent development process that a lot of organizations need. Because you have such high talent, you develop them quickly, you got to hang on to them when they have other options. And so what can companies learn about the way consulting firms do it that they can learn from managing their development processes in general?
I'll tell you, we're not any different with the challenges of talent, right? And I think, to what you're talking about, Wafaa, I think we've had to create our own, as we've grown our digital practice, and we have about 5,000 digital folks around the globe, we've had to create our own digital paths for these individuals. And those paths need to look like anywhere from an analyst to a partner. And the markers for success that what you're describing look slightly different for certain things and exactly the same for certain other things. So there's the common elements that everyone's expected to have, right? Be impact driven, be collaborative, et cetera. But then when you look at a data scientist, the expectations of the craft are layered on top of it. They're slightly different for a designer, et cetera. So I think the duality, we as a consulting firm also had to go through our own, kind of revision of our paths and what it means to be successful if we wanted to make sure we had that same talent.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'll just building on that. I had the same kind of we got our own Great Resignation challenges too.
Yeah.
But I think also coming back to that point about forcing leaders to be unselfish, right? The way that professional services is designed inherently, right? You're moving people between projects. There's a bit of forced unselfishness that, creates that talent mobility. And I think that is something that other organizations can learn from, is how do you set up a system that doesn't rely on, okay, Melissa's a good human being, she'll give talent up to another team, but just structurally, it makes me give talent up to another team. It's just how it works. So there's something in that piece too.
Thanks. So listen, I teach at a college, and you're sitting at a college. What role do universities, community colleges have in this process? How do you or how should companies work with them to help out?
Well, so I'll give an interesting kind of location strategy tidbit. What our guys who work on location strategy are saying is that we're seeing a lot more organizations deliberately move back into higher cost locations with a greater concentration of academic institutions. Because of that belief that the kind of creating a business ecosystem is a shared task. And this idea that we're all, I'm a rock, I'm an island, right? We can all be in it alone is completely flawed. So they're willing to pay more for talent and pay more in overhead, facilities, everything else, just to be close to universities, community colleges, what have you. And I think that's a really meaningful data point because they're voting with their pocketbooks, right? They're devoting resources to this. And what that should say to colleges and universities is, you're vital and business wants to stick close to you. So think about your role in that ecosystem really, really consciously. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with all the stuff that you do, so. Yeah.
Well, I think add to that mix the boot camps or the niche academies that help this talent grow. I was talking to someone at dinner last night here, actually, who was talking about how taking, Melissa, what you talked about to the next level, companies are actually renting space on the campus, right? So they are now next to the talent that's taking the class that they're interested in, the skill set being built, and they're right on campus. So you've got access to these people for the 4 years they're there, but then you can talk about transitioning them directly from university into the organization. And the same concept applies to the boot camps. I mean, there's so many out there today that are a whole new set of sourcing options for organizations to go hire talent from these boot camps or these academies that are truly cranking out people that want to do this for a living. Like they've invested in themselves to go through a 3-month, 6-month rigorous program because this is what they want to do. And organizations should really take advantage of that, tap into it.
And what I hear from these boot camps is you've got people who have seen the other side, and they're just motivated and they're loyal in ways that you don't see in other places. So.
Yeah, and maybe I would add as well, there are, I think, opportunities for us to work together on making sure that we attract as well more diverse workforce as well. So I think there is a role for us to do, and I know many of us are doing it with different colleges and community colleges, make sure that we have the right diverse set of talent entering even the STEM field, staying in it, graduating from it, entering colleges or maybe hiring them even without they graduate or something like that. I think that's a role that we can do better at collectively. And opportunities as well for colleges to help us upskill our existing workforce. None of us is going to be able or want to just fire and hire a full new workforce. So again, developing the talent we have is critical. So when I know there are several programs where we were talking about an executive technology basic program that I know MIT runs, I know other schools run that, but there is much more we can do, and we're looking at that for data science on our side. Where can we partner with colleges to help us as well?
So are you seeing, one of my colleagues says, my boss, Sanjay Sarma, says, nobody would ever dream that all you have to do is work out a lot between 18 and 22 years old and you're fit for the rest of your life. It's just a stupid thing to even think,
Exactly.
but that's what we do with colleges.
Yes.
And so where are some good examples that you've seen of this idea of helping the mid-career people in working with colleges too, as opposed to just being a way to attract?
We've done it really well in leadership development. Okay. So we've done it, and many of us, I participated in several executive development programs at different schools. So we know how to do it as companies, we know how to do it, you know how to do it as colleges. So we need to create an equivalent of that in the field we're talking about here in digital. I don't know what the answer is, but I just wanted to remind us that we've done it really well for executive leadership programs. That's what executive education does in most schools.
And I think we need to steal a trick from, again, this is another dirty secret of professional services and why its talent development model is so interesting. We make the junior people do all the work. And I'm being a bit facetious about it, but I consistently find that the junior folks on my team I learn a ton from, right? And that's the model of kind of this bilateral learning. And that's where I think it gets interesting for mid-career folks interacting with colleges is, it's not the same model of come in as a raw 18-year-old and we're going to teach you all the stuff, right? It's come in, teach what you have, and learn from the populations around you. And that kind of the back and forth and the reverse mentoring, I think that's where we see some interesting, green shoots where companies that we've worked with have had executives kind of go teach and then bring back so much that they actually learned from the populations they were allegedly teaching.
I've also had some organizations who have gotten creative and essentially looked at college curriculums and said, for my middle tier, I don't need this whole thing, but I need that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. And they've created partnerships with universities or institutions or even professors and said, I want to create my own academy internally because I've got a workforce of about 15,000 people that I can't send them all to college at the same time because who's going to do the work? But what I'd like to do is have a partnership with you so that these 5 of the 15 courses you offer become something you offer to my organization on a periodic schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's just lots of ways to get creative on this notion of upskilling that goes beyond just the, do I have to go sit in a classroom? Do I have to sign up for the entire program? Is this going to be a 2-year journey that companies are getting really creative around?
And that's a really interesting idea. And that's really tough from an academic standpoint, too, because we have our governance processes, right? And we have this feeling like if you're not earning credit, you're not actually doing real work. Mm-hmm. And so what you just said is, let's get rid of the credit thing. Let's just teach you your knowledge. And that's actually going to feel really weird to some educators, but I think it's a really neat idea. Can I try another weird idea? I mentioned, people don't need degrees. Corporations require it. And there's this idea that, actual certifications that prove you know what you're doing are valued more than diplomas every time you do a survey. So do you see inside companies this idea that you're able to develop these certifications, develop these ideas of skills, and that's how people are going to be progressing? Or is this still a dream right now?
I think it's the leading edge,
okay,
to be honest, because I think this idea that, because what companies have tested and learned and failed mostly on, it's self-reported skills, right? Like, I think I'm amazing at this. I think I'm great at that, right? And it's got not only just kind of baseline issues, but it's also got meaningful DEI issues, right? If you're a member of a default group, you tend to just feel great about your skills, right? If you're a member of a diverse group, you tend to rate yourself lower, right? So it's just it's more kind of, we're dealing with the fallout of the self-reporting era. And the rise of certifications, I think, is a constructive response to that. But then again, somebody in the organization has got to know what good looks like, right? And for certain skills, right, it can be hard to even find one person who does, right? That's why it's an emerging skill, and this is the great kind of paradox of skills development. So, I think it's something we're starting to see organizations start to get good at, but they're definitely not there yet.
I'd agree with that. We actually recently started what we call them guilds in the organization. And so we've got an Agile guild, a design and engineering, et cetera. And very recently, in the last 6 to 8 months, we've started the notion of badging within the guilds. But the bar, so the guild leaders are setting the bar for what good looks like so that it's not just arbitrary. And if you have the certification, you're automatically good at it. And so the bar is being set and the badges are laid out. And now it's up to the individual to figure out how they earn that badge. And there's ways to go do it, which are all about hands-on ways of proving that you've done this in a context. You're not just attended a course and hit a check mark. You actually demonstrated this skill in the last engagement that you did, or you demonstrated this skill by going out and learning it and coming back and teaching it to a bunch of people. And so badging, I agree, it's for us even, it's a new concept, but it is helping people understand, A, what the bar looks like, but be a way to create excitement and gamification around this, which, who's not competitive, right? Everyone wants the badges. So we're seeing a ton of just excitement, momentum in the learning space because of this notion of badging.
So we all had our gold stars we like to get from the teachers, and you're giving them gold stars now to pile up on there.
It starts in kindergarten, it doesn't end.
That's great. Good. There's a kind of a sad question in the questions, but I want to add it there because it's staring right at us right now. When we got the Skills and Talent Challenge, is that increasing the incentives to put automation in so you don't need those people anymore? And how do you fight that trend, or do you need to fight that trend?
Yeah, I would say don't fight it.
Okay.
Because I think it's there's a really good question here about how do we best deploy human workers? And part of what's driving the Great Resignation, right, is people hate their jobs, right? They're bored. Their jobs are literally killing them. I mean, the World Health Organization says it's something like 750,000 excess deaths per year just due to work being crummy. Not people being killed at work, just work not being very good, right? So anything you can do with automation to make human workers sort of not disgusted with their jobs, right? It increases retention, it reduces risk, it increases productivity, right? Like employee happiness is generally a positive. It lifts a lot of business boats. And that's where, I think automation is very helpful in that regard. And, it's just where you deploy it, right? And I'm personally not the biggest fan of algorithmic management, right? I think algorithms right now make some fairly lousy decisions. So it's more the where of automation than just automation itself. I think in general it could be a real social positive.
I don't think you should fight it, and I don't think you can fight it either. It's gonna happen. It's happening at a faster pace, and it will continue to evolve. I think it reinforces the point where we started this conversation a few minutes ago about the need to continue to learn and adjust our skills, all of us together. So the roles that we're going to have in the future are going to be different than the roles we all have now across the full enterprise, not just in the technology function. So how do we make sure that we continue to develop everyone? How do we continue, each of us having a learning and a growth mindset so that we continue to be relevant? The way we are going to be relevant is going to be different than what we are today. And that's okay, that's part of the progress society is making, but I don't think anyone can fight it, and I don't think we should.
Can't disagree. I would love to also apply automation, frankly, to workforce planning and using that as a way to generate insights so leaders and managers can make smart decisions about their workforce. I mean, let's just start at the basics. I don't think most companies do that. And so if we can get to good strategic workforce plans and then use the self-reported skills or what have you, to then be able to run automation to say, how do we need to grow our data science capabilities over the next few years? Where do we need to outsource less and bring in those capabilities? Where do we need to outsource more so that we're not actually spending our own energy on it? So I would love to just see automation just even be applied to workforce planning.
Thank you. So before I ask the last question for the crew here, I want to just take kind of moderator's privilege and do a blatant sales call on something we're doing here at MIT. These challenges are big challenges, and we see pockets where organizations are doing them well. We see a lot of shared challenges. We see pockets where organizations are doing it well, and pockets where organizations are really struggling. And yet, when the organizations do it well, they often have to learn it on their own. They don't learn it from other people. And this is a missed opportunity. And so one of the things we're launching at MIT, June 17th, so very soon, is what we're calling the Global Opportunity Initiative. So if you want to look at goi.mit.edu, you can see what it is. And it'll be a free opportunity for organizations that care about developing people to come in and share their stories, to learn from the stories of others, and maybe solve some problems together. So we're launching this in June. Anybody that's interested, you're welcome to join. We just ask that you bring your good ideas and bring your goodwill to work with the community to help everybody be smarter in this process. So goi.mit.edu. Commercial over. Let's go on to the last question for the people. And the last question is just, there are so many times, and this is my own pet peeve, where people say that simple thing that just is nowhere near as simple as it is, right? Something that, it's a common statement in talent and learning that sounds nice, but it just isn't. And I had asked each of the panelists here to have this one thing that they have that's similar, that's kind of a pet peeve of theirs. So let's start down at the end here. Wafaa, what's something that people say that sounds good that just isn't?
We just need a better HR team.
Great. Suman?
We hire for potential.
Interesting.
We just need the right curriculum.
Great. Well, I'll resist adding a few more in there. These are three really wonderful ones. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for contributing your knowledge here and for being so great about just letting us go wherever the conversation went. I really appreciated that. I've learned so much from the panel. I'm sure everybody else has. And I just want to thank you as all panelists for being here.
Thanks for having us.